perfect yet. It's the Studebaker. Yeah, the one with the little doggy in the window that goes.
There is a moment in television history that most people have never seen, and yet those who did see it have never forgotten it. It aired once, just once, and the woman at the center of it, the woman who built an entire career out of making people laugh until their sides ached, has refused to watch it again for nearly 5 decades. Carol Burnett is many things to many people. She is a woman who pulled her ear at the end of every episode of her variety show as a private signal to her grandmother watching at home. She is the comedian who can make an audience dissolve into helpless laughter with nothing more than a raised eyebrow or a perfectly timed stumble. She is a performer who brought genuine warmth and electricity to every stage she ever stood on. But in 1977, during the 10th season of the Carol Burnett Show, she did something that stunned her crew, rattled her audience, and has haunted her quietly ever since. She stopped being funny, on purpose, and what came out of her instead was something so raw, so personal, and so deeply rooted in the pain of her own life that even now, at over 90 years old, she cannot bring herself to sit down and watch it. To understand why, you have to go back much further than 1977. You have to go all the way back to San Antonio, Texas, in 1933, to a little girl who had already learned that the world was not a safe place before she was old enough to understand what safety even meant. Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, into a household defined not by love or stability, but by alcoholism and absence. Her father, Joseph Thomas Burnett, worked at a movie theater when he could hold a job, but addiction made steady employment impossible. Her mother, Louise Creighton, drank just as heavily and was emotionally unavailable in a way that only people drowning in their own pain can be. Both parents would eventually die from illnesses connected to their drinking. But long before those deaths, Carol had already been left behind in the most essential way. Not abandoned to an orphanage or a stranger, but abandoned in plain sight by 2 people who simply could not show up for her. What does a child do with that kind of loneliness? Some children go silent. Some grow angry. Carol Burnett learned to perform, not for applause, not yet, but for survival. Humor became the thing she could build a wall out of, quick enough to deflect, sturdy enough to protect the softer parts of herself from the hardness of what her daily life actually looked like. When she was still very young, perhaps 5 or 6, her grandmother, Mabel White, stepped in. Mabel was not wealthy. She was not educated in the formal sense. But she was present, and she was constant. And for a child who had known almost nothing but instability, those 2 qualities amounted to everything. In 1940, when Carol was 7, Mabel packed up what little they had and moved them from Texas to Hollywood, California. If that sounds like the beginning of a storybook, the reality was very different. There was no glamour waiting for them. They moved into a single room in a rundown boarding house in the center of the city that had already chewed up and discarded hundreds of people with bigger resources and more connections than they had. Their room was cramped. Their neighbors were struggling people, those fighting addiction, mental illness, or simply the grinding poverty of the Depression's long shadow. Carol and her grandmother survived on $20 a week in welfare assistance. $20. That was their world, materially speaking. And yet within it, Mabel gave Carol something that money cannot manufacture. The feeling of being genuinely loved. It was in that boarding house, in those circumstances, that Carol's imagination took root. She invented a pretend twin sister. She named Karen. Karen was everything Carol felt she was not. Confident, beautiful, at ease in the world. Carol played both characters for the other tenants of the building, slipping away up the fire escape to change her hair or her clothes, and reappearing as Karen, playful and charming, before switching back again moments later. That the adults in that building, many of them barely holding themselves together, believed in Karen, even temporarily, says something both about Carol's instinct for performance and about how desperately everyone in that place needed something light to believe in. Even then, before she had ever set foot on a stage, she understood intuitively that a good performance could give people a brief holiday from their pain. Every Saturday, Mabel would take Carol to the movies. Tickets cost 25 cents for 2 seats, more than 10% of their entire weekly income. But Mabel considered it worth it. in the darkness of that theater, the world outside ceased to exist. Stars moved across the screen with elegance and ease. People wore beautiful clothes. There was order and music and joy. When the lights came back up, Carol and her grandmother returned to their reality. They couldn't afford toilet paper at home, so they would quietly take some from the theater bathroom before they left. There was no shame in the taking, because there was no choice in the matter. Necessity had its own kind of dignity. It was in one of those Saturday matinees that Carol first heard the famous Tarzan yell. That particular, piercing, wildly exuberant sound that Johnny Weissmuller had turned into a cinematic legend. She was transfixed by it. At home, she began practicing it obsessively, working on the pitch and the rhythm and the breath control required to do it properly, not knowing she was training herself at all. She thought she was just playing. In reality, she was developing the kind of vocal command that most trained performers spend years trying to acquire. That yell would go on to become one of her most beloved performance signatures. The sound of a child's joy turned into a professional's weapon. By the time Carol graduated from high school, she had a plan: journalism. Her mother had always harbored literary ambitions that her illness had slowly extinguished, and Carol felt some sense of obligation to finish what her mother had begun. She set her sights on UCLA, but when enrollment time came, she didn't have the $50 required for tuition. $50, roughly $600 in today's terms, stood between her and the future she was reaching for. Then something happened that Carol has described in interviews over the years and still cannot fully explain. A stranger, someone whose name she never learned and never has been able to discover, paid her tuition. No explanation was offered. No strings were attached. No debt was demanded in return. Just enough money from an unknown hand to open a door. At UCLA, she enrolled intending to study journalism. Then she took one elective course in the theater department, and everything changed. In that classroom, doing the thing that she had been doing quietly and instinctively since childhood, something locked into place. She was not invisible in that room. She was not poor or lonely or unworthy of notice. She was funny. She was alive, and people were paying attention in the best possible way. Her professors saw it. Her classmates saw it. At the end of her first year, she was named Most Promising Newcomer in UCLA's theater program. It was not just an award. It was a permission slip to stop surviving and start dreaming. Her path from UCLA to New York is the stuff of almost impossible luck. And yet, even here, it was luck built on real talent and genuine courage. At a party in San Diego in 1954, Carol, still working part-time as an usherette for 65 cents an hour, met a stranger, a millionaire shipbuilder from La Jolla, who listened to her talk about Broadway and then made her an offer that seemed almost absurd in its generosity. He would give her $1,000 and the same to her boyfriend Don Soroyan to get to New York and take their shot. The conditions were unusual. Never reveal his name, use the money only to reach New York, and if they made it, help others do the same. He offered no explanation beyond this. Someone had once helped him, and he was paying it forward. Carol and Don packed their things and headed east. When they arrived in New York City in 1954, Carol had never been further from home than Texas. She knew almost no one. She checked into the Algonquin Hotel at $9 a night, watched the money begin to evaporate, and at one desperate low point broke down crying while making a collect call back home, listening to her family beg her to come back. Then she heard a radio announcement that a hurricane named Carol was moving up the East Coast. She took it as a sign. She decided to stay. She found her way to the Rehearsal Club, a boarding house for young women trying to break into the arts. For $18 a week, she shared a cramped room and a single bathroom with her other aspiring actresses. By her own account, it was paradise compared to where she had come from. The place hummed with ambition and energy and the particular kind of hope that young people in pursuit of something carry with them like a second heartbeat. She worked nights as a hat check girl and auditioned during the days. In March of 1955, she and the other girls at the Rehearsal Club put on a showcase, the kind of raw, do-it-yourself production that people with no money and unlimited nerve put together when they have no other option. They sent invitations to every agent and producer they could think of. Marlene Dietrich showed up. Doors began to open. Her first genuine break came from an absurd love song, a deliberately ridiculous ballad written about John Foster Dulles, the stiff and humorless U.S. Secretary of State. The song was a joke, top to bottom, and Carol played it with such total commitment, with such precise understanding of its comedy, that it went far beyond what any purely ironic performance could achieve. Audiences did not just laugh. They howled. She was invited onto the Jack Paar Show, then the Ed Sullivan Show. On January 6, 1957, she walked onto Sullivan's stage with shaking knees and left with the audience in stitches. The ridiculous Dulles ballad had made her the talk of New York comedy. Her Broadway breakthrough came in 1959 with Once Upon a Mattress, a musical built around the princess and the pea fairy tale, in which Carol played Princess Winifred. Loud, ungainly, clumsy, nothing like the delicate heroines of traditional fairy tales, and absolutely everything like someone who had grown up finding ways to make the world laugh at her own expense rather than behind her back. The show was not expected to succeed. Critics were skeptical when it moved from off-Broadway to Broadway in May of 1959. But audiences loved it, and they loved Carol in it specifically. The show ran for 470 performances. When Carol left the cast in June of 1960, the production collapsed within a week. Her replacement lasted 8 performances before the show closed entirely. She had become, without anyone quite planning for it to happen, irreplaceable. That same year, she began her tenure on The Gary Moore Show, which ran until 1962 and transformed her from a rising name into a genuine television star. She won her first Emmy in 1962. Her cleaning lady character became iconic. The show's format, particularly the warm, loose, unrehearsed interactions with a live studio audience that Gary Moore was known for, gave Carol a model she would later make entirely her own. On September 11, 1967, the Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS. What followed over the next 11 years was one of the most remarkable sustained runs in the history of American television. 30 million viewers per week for 11 seasons, 25 Primetime Emmy Awards, 2 Golden Globes for Carol herself, recognition from Time Magazine, TV Guide, and Variety as one of the greatest television programs ever produced. The show was not just popular, it changed the medium. It was among the first variety programs to feature live comedy sketches before a studio audience, and that structure, raw, present, capable of veering off-script at any moment, directly inspired the model that Saturday Night Live would later build its entire identity on. And Carol was not just a participant in this achievement. She was its architect, its engine, and its constant. At a time when virtually every major variety show on American television was hosted by a man, she was something genuinely new, a woman who led her own show, shaped its sensibility, hired its writers, developed its recurring characters, and made every final creative decision. She did not do this by being aggressive or combative. She did it by being better than everyone expected, more consistent than the industry believed a woman could be, and funny in a way that could not be dismissed or minimized or explained away. The show's greatest gift to its audience was its willingness to be unpolished. Harvey Korman, who was with the show for most of its run, was notorious for losing his composure on camera, cracking up at Tim Conway, breaking character at crucial moments, turning into a genuine mess of laughter in front of 30 million viewers. And the audience loved it because that laughter was real. Tim Conway, for his part, operated on a philosophy of deliberate unpredictability. He held back in rehearsal and detonated in performance, so that the moments his castmates tried to contain were moments of genuine surprise. The most famous example is the Elephant Story, an improvised, absurdist tale Conway launched into during a sketch from the family segment of the show, a story that grew longer and stranger and funnier until even a normally unflappable Vicki Lawrence dissolved. These were not manufactured moments. They were the product of real people genuinely delighting each other, and the camera caught it and transmitted it to every living room in America. The family sketch series deserves its own discussion because it was within the family that the 1977 episode happened, the one that changed everything and that Carol Burnett has never watched again. The family sketches were recurring pieces that Carol and the writers developed across multiple seasons. They centered on a dysfunctional household, the kind of working-class, emotionally battered family that American television had spent decades pretending didn't exist. The humor in these sketches was sharp and sometimes uncomfortable, rooted in the specific absurdities of people who love each other in ways that are also damaging. Carol's character in the family was Eunice Higgins, a woman consumed by frustration, by the gap between what she had imagined for her life and what her life had actually delivered. Eunice was funny, but she was also, in the way of the very best comic characters, genuinely sad. She was the kind of person audiences laughed at and then felt vaguely guilty about laughing at, because the laughter came from recognizing something true. The regular Eunice sketches balanced comedy and dysfunction in roughly equal measure. The audience knew what to expect. Loud arguments, slammed doors, the particular cruelty that only families can inflict on each other, and underneath it all, something almost tender. But in 1977, the writers brought Carol a script that departed from that formula completely. The episode was titled in reference to a talent competition, a sketch that found Eunice believing, with the absolute conviction of someone who has never been given a reason to stop hoping, that performing on a local talent show would finally be her moment, that it would be the thing that launched her into the life she always knew she deserved. It didn't. The judges mocked her. One of the judges, played by real-life game show personality Alan Ludden, delivered his verdict with the particular cheerful cruelty of someone who has done this many times before and has learned not to think too hard about the people on the other side of the table. And Carol played Eunice's response straight. No comic accent. No exaggerated reaction. No winking at the audience. Just a woman who had hung her last remaining hope on a single moment and watched it fall apart in front of strangers who didn't care at all. The crew, watching from behind the cameras, went quiet. Some of them cried. When the episode aired, viewers were stunned in the same way. Critics, who had always admired the show's technical brilliance and its willingness to push against what variety television was supposed to be, called it something different altogether. A piece of genuine drama delivered inside a format that wasn't supposed to be capable of it. Awards followed, as they always did for the Carol Burnett show. But Carol herself never watched it. Not that night. Not the next week. Not in any of the 47 years that have passed since it aired. She has explained why in various interviews